Hi everybody, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame, and today I want to talk about paying attention. Now, you would think that because we're photographers and we're observing the world all the time, that we're paying really careful attention to the shots that we're making and to the scenes that are happening in front of our eyes. But if you take a look at a lot of photographs, you realize that people really aren't doing that. What they're often doing is that they're reacting to something that they see, some subject. They raise the camera to their eye and they press the button without really carefully looking at the entire frame. And I think that's probably my biggest criticism over a lot of photographs, is that people don't realize what they're using in terms of the scene to compose their frame. And I think that paying attention is a skill that's really important, especially for street photographers to develop, in order to ensure that you get a great shot. So I'm going to talk about that with the three images that I picked. But before I get to the photographs, I want to remind you that I'm going to be in San Antonio on November 18th for 4x5 Photo Fest. And it's a special event that happens each year. This is the second year, in which professional photographers and aspiring photographers get together and talk shop. So there is a schedule up now if you go to 4x5photofest.com, and you can see the photographers that are going to be doing presentations. I'm going to be doing 2 live interviews for the Candid Frame podcast while there, but take a look at the schedule and you'll see all the things that are going to be available on that day, and hope to see some of you there. And then I'll also be in Miami in December for the Miami Street Photography Festival. So if you love street photography and you're going to be down in Miami, you don't want to miss this. They got some amazing photographers: Maggie Stieber, Konstantin Manos, Larry Fink. I'm going to be doing a master class while I'm down there, and their space is still available. And they may be still available for the workshops that these and other photographers are going to be conducting down there. So if you want to get, knee deep in street photography and you can make it down to Miami, check it out. It should be a lot of fun. Okay, for our first shot, we have one by Karl Lemaire. This was made with a Fujifilm X100T at 640th of a second, f10, ISO 200. Now, one of the things I've talked about recently is the importance of being aware of the stage, the background, the setting onto which you're going to make your photograph. When you do so, you have the luxury of time. You can look at the scene before any human element is in the frame, and you can kind of figure out what choices do you make in order to make a really good composition. In this case, the setting is informed a lot by the play of light and shadow that exists in the skate park. The human element is certainly important, but it is not critical in terms of you being able to lead up to this moment in order to figure out exactly how you want to frame the shot. Once you do so, you can start paying attention to the human element. And in this case, it's the skater that's coming down the wall of the bowl of the skate park and producing a shadow near the center of the frame. And what usually happens with a scene like this, and especially in a skate park, which I've shot in before, is that you can usually anticipate where skaters are going to move and the kind of shot you may be able to get as a result. So I'm sure that Karl here had probably noticed that skaters that were coming in from this point could cast a shadow in this area of highlight within the frame. So at that point, he could position himself to try and take advantage of that. And what's interesting about this shot is, even though the human figure is over here in the right-hand corner of the frame, and it's really dominant because it's probably the brightest element in the frame, it's the shadow that really is the anchor of the shot. So it's kind of the reverse of what we usually experience, in which people would photograph the skater and be completely oblivious to what's happening in the background. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of paying attention, is looking at the scene and really considering what kind of photograph do I want to make. Because I guarantee you, if there were other photographers that were making pictures in a skate park, they were primarily focused with the skaters. They weren't really paying attention to the light. They weren't paying attention to the shadow. If anything, all they were trying to do is get some peak action that they could freeze with a fast shutter speed in order to get a good action shot or a good trick shot. Karl is doing something else. He is really thinking about the frame, thinking about the light, thinking about shadow, and how the human element can add a graphic element to the shot. That, for me, is someone who's looking and observing carefully with consciousness in terms of what they want their image to look like. Most people would not compose a frame with the skater at the far right end of the frame, because they go, well, that's the main subject. Why is he not in the middle or near the middle? Or why aren't you using the rule of thirds to compose the shot? And for me, the anchor really is the shadow, not so much the human figure. The human figure, the guy, is a secondary element, surprisingly. And it's usually the reverse. The shadow is usually the secondary element. But because of the way shadow is prioritized in this photograph, that shadow becomes one of the first place we look, and then we look at the subject here. And I really love how this curve of shadow here perfectly frames him. It's really beautifully done. But by observing a scene, even before you make your first photograph, you can start taking your time to think about what kind of photograph do I want to make. And then you can make choices in terms of how you want to expose for the scene, how you want to orient the camera, what lens you want to use, how far do you want to be from the scene. All of those choices get informed by you paying attention to what's happening right in front of you. Okay, here we have a shot by Stefano Lista. This we have no XF data for this. I really love this shot because of the expression on the girl's face and the gesture of her hands as she's holding her top or her sweater over her shoulder. That expression, the way she's holding her hands, she just seems to be in this moment in her head that I think is really interesting. And as a counterpoint to that, we have all these other people that are behind her who are all in very different places. You have the young boy in the upper right-hand corner who seems to be sort of mad that he's even there. You have the guy with the sunglasses with the phone. You have the two women talking. You have the older fellow. You have the young boy who's just peeking out from underneath her right arm. And all of those seem to play off of her expression and her presence there. And the light on her is just really beautiful. But it's really interesting to see her expression in contrast to everyone else that's in the frame. Usually when you have a lot of other faces in the frame, your eyes get pulled to those faces to the point where the main subject gets minimized. That's not happening here, at least to my eye. But I'm talking about paying attention to small details. And the thing that piques my that immediately draws my attention is what's happening in the far left corner of the frame. We have that elbow that's sticking out in the lower left-hand corner, as well as a person with a red top or a red sweater at the far left side of the frame. Now, those things to me are distracting, especially the elbow. Now, when I see a scene like this and say I want to photograph it, I'm always scanning the edges of the frame. I usually start at 12 o'clock and I go around in a sort of clockwise fashion to see whether or not there are any distracting elements at the edges of the frame, because that's usually for me where the distractions are. And if I'd seen those elbows, and if I had the luxury of being able to react to it quickly enough, I might have moved in a little closer. I might have changed my focal length. I might have made some sort of choice to eliminate the dominance of that elbow and the red elbow just above it from the frame. But the reality is sometimes things are happening so quickly that you may not have the time to do that. But that being said, one of the things that I stress with my students is the idea that even if there are elements at the edges of the frame that you can't get rid of, you want to be able to say that you are conscious of those things when you made the photograph, and not that, oh, you discovered it only later when you opened up the image on your computer. Because when you see it, when you're actually making the photographs, you have an option there usually. You can make a choice as to whether or not you want to include it and how you want to eliminate it. By the time you get to the computer, there's not much you can do about it, except maybe crop it. And sometimes cropping doesn't fix it. So for me, when I see a scene like this that I think is really magical, but I see an element on the left-hand side of the frame that I can't remedy because I really need to get the shot because it's going to disappear if I don't make the image, I take pride in the fact that I observed that element when I made the photograph. I may not have been able to eliminate it for whatever reason, but at least I knew it was there when I made the shot. When I see things like that in when I open up my images in Lightroom, and that's when I'm seeing them, then I tell myself, what was I doing? What was I paying too much attention to that I didn't do that sort of round-the-clock scan along the edges of the frame to make sure that I didn't have that distracting element? It's usually because I was distracted with something. When I'm really on point, when I'm really carefully observing what's happening, more often than not, I see those little elements. And I can make a conscious choice to include them or not include them. And even if I can't, at least I can say, I saw it, I observed it. And I think that is really sort of an essential skill to develop as a street photographer. All right, and lastly, we have a shot by Teresa. This was made with a Olympus EPL7 at 1/3200th of a second, f11, ISO 1600. Now, this is an amazing shot. You have this fellow who's carrying something over his right shoulder with that cigarette dangling from his mouth. And as a counterpoint to that, we have this yellow container with these vegetables that are all wrapped up. We have these three figures here that seem to be discussing something about the items here. We have this guy filling up the negative space where the clouds in the sky are. We have this truck in the lower left corner. All of these elements just play off of each other in a really marvelous way. And I don't know whether Chris just encountered this scene and just made the shot, or whether or not he kind of saw the initial setting, by which I mean the sky, the container, these men here, and then waited for someone to come into the foreground in order to make the shot. I tend to think it's the latter, and the reason I think that is because of his settings. He's using a very small aperture and a really high ISO in order to maximize depth of field, because with an f11 you have very deep depth of field, and also he's using a relatively fast shutter speed to ensure sharpness, which is especially important when you have somebody moving across the frame but very close to the camera. You need a really fast shutter speed in order to ensure that they come out pretty sharp. So based on those settings, I'm sort of thinking that he sort of anticipated this moment, positioned himself so he could frame it in this way, and then just timed it so when the fellow came into the frame, he was able to make his shot. If he just did a grab shot, then that's absolutely remarkable. But, you know, most of the time, the chances of being able to get a grab shot and just react and get it that quickly and have it as well composed and as interesting as this is pretty high. And I've been shooting for a long time, so I can count probably on my hand how many times I've been lucky enough to react and have a shot that has as many different elements as this to come together as nicely as this does. If you have a single element and a very simple background, being able to get that kind of grab shot is fairly easy. But when you're building a layered composition, man, that is really difficult to get just by instinct. Not to say that it's impossible, but I think that for the most part, people who are able to do that consistently have a lot of experience underneath their belt. But again, going back to the whole idea in terms of paying attention, I think that what's really essential here is paying attention to all the various elements in the frame. You have these guys here in the lower right-hand corner, and as I said, there's this triangle of shadow that exists here, which helps to frame them. You have this figure standing here who helps to fill in what it otherwise would have been an area of negative space. You have the face here and that gesture of that cigarette in contrast to the thing that he's handling over his shoulder. All of the things play off each other really, really beautifully. The composition is a little bit off kilter, but that doesn't ruin the shot for me. I have easy time believing that this moment was happening so quickly that he probably couldn't orient the camera perfectly so the horizon line would have been perfectly straight. And, you know, I forgive him for that because everything else in this shot is really strong. But, you know, whether or not you have the luxury of time as you did with the first shot or don't have it as likely is with this shot, all three images demonstrate how important it is to pay attention, especially to what's happening along the edges of your frame and to those little details that can make or break your shot. You know, just shooting from the hip or just absently firing your shutter speed in order to get and hope you get a picture is really no way to be consistent. Yeah, you may be lucky every once in a while in terms of pulling off a shot, but more than likely, you're not going to be the kind of photographer that can go out and produce consistent images over any period of time. And I think everyone wants to be the kind of photographer that is intentional about some, if not all, of the images that they make. They don't want to rely on luck in order to make the picture. And that's why it's so important to slow down and get to the point that you are paying attention, that you are as present as you possibly can be in the moment, so you can make the best choices for your photograph. Well, I hope that was helpful. The Candid Frame is a podcast in which I interview photographers about their work and career. It's not just this YouTube channel. And what you can do is you can go to thecandidframe.com and you can listen to hundreds and hundreds of episodes, the latest of which was with photographer Jim Harmer, who is the creator of improvephotography.com, a great resource for learning photography. And we have going to get to about 400 episodes in the near future. And one of the best ways to download and listen to any of those episodes is to download the Candid Frame app. And you'll find it here on the website. So if you scroll down on the website to here, you'll find the Candid Frame app, which is completely free. And it's available for Apple iOS and Android. And you can download it onto your phone or tablet. And you can access any of the episodes. You can save them. You can stream them. If you really like an episode, you can share it on Twitter or Facebook. And if you want to contact me directly, you can do so all via the app. And it's completely free. So, hope you like what you've seen here today. And if you do, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and then I'll see you next time.